So we're going to go right into the panel discussion, Collisions in the Greater West. And I have invited 4 artists with work in the Unsettled exhibition to join me. They're going to start by each giving a brief presentation on their work. And when they've all finished, we'll follow up with a panel discussion as well as questions from the audience. And I will start by introducing the rock star from last night. Many of you may have heard his band playing, the Special Two, Frohawk Two Feathers, AKA Umar Rashid, who is originally from Chicago. He's based in Los Angeles, and his practice is equal parts literary, visual, and musical. Bringing a hip-hop aesthetic together with an avid interest in American and world history, Two Feathers invents written narratives based on the colonial past of the imaginary Fringland Empire. What the world might have been if France and England had joined forces in the 18th century. These narratives inform his visual artworks. So please help me to welcome Frohawk Two Feathers.
No, I'm just joking. Hey guys, sorry about my throat. I'm not used to the dryness, and thank you so much for everybody who came out last night. Thanks for coming today, and happy to be here. Thank you, JoAnne. That was a really great presentation, and everyone else who spoke earlier today. I was slightly passing in and out, but I was here and I was attentive. So yeah, I'm Umar Rashid of Frohawk Two Feathers. I have a lot of different names. Please allow me to introduce myself. So basically, I make art about history. I recreated a whole entire fictional narrative, and can I just, yeah, just press the buttons? Yeah. Okay, excellent. Yeah. So, okay. Oh, the arrows, right. Oh, excellent. Okay, so this is the empire is called Fringland. So basically, essentially, see the French tricolor and the Union Jack, and this is the battle flag of the French Fringlish Republic, the Fringlish Empire. And I made this in about 2013. So I do a wide range of work. So the work that I have in the exhibition, Unsettled, is a paper piece. It's a coffee and tea stain map, but I also do applique flags, battle scenes, portraits mostly, and sculpture and everything, and performance, as you saw last night. So this is a newer piece of work. This is the effect of diabetes. The effect of diabetes, and so it talks about the sugarcane empires and the sugarcane republics in the Caribbean and how, and northern South America, and how sugarcane kind of proliferates, but then also causes a lot of confusion and destruction, and eventually that is made into well, there's war. War is the outcome in that. So it's really cool, like when you read all this stuff, but I don't think you guys can read it. How sharp is that coming out for you? No. You can't read it? Okay, well, it's still around. You check it out on Artsy. And it's still for sale. Now, this is the King and Queen of Harlem. Also very different. I utilize a lot of different work. So basically, initially when I started, I took a lot of work from a lot of my compositional styles from Lakota ledger drawings or ledger drawings from the Great Plains, and also from Turkish miniatures and Indian Kaligat painting. And so, like, I just take in African sculpture and a lot of different places, and it's kind of like this hodgepodge, because my narrative is a global narrative, and since I'm talking about the whole world, it all makes sense. So, yeah, you can't read any of that stuff, but, it's colorful. It's also on artsy. Give it a whirl. This one, this one was sad. This is On Dimanche après-midi on Governor's Island. So it's like the French painting On Dimanche après-midi by Seurat. So this is my version of it, this is a lot more violent, but there's the parasols and people are, looks like somebody's getting stabbed. But there, some gods, benevolent gods just floating around in the sparkly sea. So I inject a lot of humor into my work, because when you're dealing with these things, race, class, gender issues, and all this work, and much like my performance, I just, as an African American male in the United States, I've always had to kind of like take things with a grain of salt, like, always had to be, laugh to keep from crying, stuff like that. It's sad, but that's just the way that that's the way that I've been able to survive and proliferate. So, I don't mean to take away from any of the pain of, people's pain, but, that's just the way I deal with it, and it keeps me mentally sane. That and vodka and hamburgers. This is the Palace of the Quilombos, and I know I only got like 1 minute left. So Palace of the Quilombos, that is the biggest painting that I've ever made. Actually, it's not. It is. This is the biggest painting I've ever made. So this is really crazy. I mean, I don't know, and I don't do acid or anything, but this is like an acid trip. And so that's that. This was a lot of fun to do. Okay, so, and I'm going to end off with the map that you can actually see. That is something that is not on Artsy. So the Greater West, when I was approached to do this map, I was kind of dumbfounded. I was like, wow, that's a lot of space that I haven't really covered. Because I've never done anything with Oceania. I've never done anything, except for like just a few things with, Portugal and, some of the islands, and, England and, Franklin and Australia and New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, but I've never really done anything with like Hawaii or Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia, any of that. And so this is the first time I wanted to do it, and I'm a huge fan of comic books. So the image that's the Serpent King, the Serpent Crown of the Kingdom of Lemuria, which was the opposite of Atlantis, and that is represented by the submariner Prince Namor over in the top right corner. So in addition to all the actual history, you have like the Tlingit Raven, you have the you have the Tatanka, you have the buffalo head from the Buffalo Dance, you have the Hawaiian King's Crown, you have the Eastern Island Moai, you have the Fijian version of Poseidon, which is cool. He's got like a high top fade. You have a Maori warrior, a Papuan warrior, a mask from Cook. Well, anyway, can't do that. And some people being viciously mauled by dogs. And the king and queen of Spain. You have Isabel and Ferdinand up there just living in the sparkly sea. And then all that, so when I got the map, everything made a triangle. So instead of the Bermuda Triangle, where culture just gets lost, I made the Lemurian Triangle, which also there's a whole bunch of conspiracy theories about the lost continent of Mu, and so yeah, I'm insane. But I'm just honest, just being honest. So anyway, I can go on forever, but I don't have that much time. And I'm starting to run out of steam here. So thank you very much for sitting through that. I'll be here all week.
Thank you, Frohawk. Just heads up, we're all insane, so it's not just you. Mexico City-based conceptual artist Minerva Cuevas has a practice deeply rooted in research. The formal resolution of her ideas has ranged widely from student ID cards to ice cream to underwater demonstrations. Many of her projects relate to corporate branding, especially corporations that control natural resources such as big oil and agribusiness. Cuevas has been very busy lately, organizing relief efforts and donations of food and supplies to help people in the aftermath of the 2 recent earthquakes in Mexico. She had a residency in Reno last July, and that led her to create a new mural and light installation right outside the theater titled "Which Way Does the Arrow Point?" And it was commissioned for Unsettled. So thank you for being here, Minerva.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very glad to be here once more. I decided to start with the microscopic. The first slide is presenting these very well-known plastic bags. I decided to go and hunt for a bacteria that destroys plastic and also preserve and cultivate the bacteria as an art installation. What happened is that I learned that you could easily cultivate bacteria that destroys and eats plastic. So I started imagining this huge experiment that would destroy all the plastic in the world. And yeah, I was mesmerized. A Canadian student made that possible in a small experiment, so I thought I could do it. So to do that, I went to the largest landfill in the galaxy in Mexico City. It's called Bordo Poniente. And I decided to collaborate with a geologist and a chemist to find and cultivate the bacteria. And the whole project started because I was invited to produce art project that could impact the trash problem in Mexico City. And when I got that invitation, I thought, that's impossible. No, it's like if someone is asking me to do something to solve poverty in urban areas. I said no, I rejected the invitation. They invited me again, they insisted. I said no again. I said, no, that's impossible. No art project would generate a real impact. And well, at the end they insisted, and they said that was the kind of criticism they were looking for. So I came out with the idea of going through first insects and then the microscopic. And for me, the real impact of realizing this project was not the art installation, but the collaboration with the scientists that at the end kept the research in the National University and potentially could develop a larger project in connection to how we deal with plastic, how we can disintegrate all the plastic that we have created in the world. When I step on that landfill, I realized I was stepping on capitalism. I realized, okay, this is how capitalism looks like in an image. But okay, I'll continue. I've worked in many different ways, as JoAnne mentioned. This one is a graphic example. I've used the National Geographic magazine also as an interesting example of how media deals with nature, environmental issues, but at the same time with advertising. And we can notice that all the advertising in National Geographic connects to flights and cars and machinery. So that was interesting for me. It became a series. an intervention in Mexico City happened in 2002. This is it used to be a public fun fair between two main avenues in Mexico called Revolucion and Patriotism. And you had the usual traffic around. When I noticed these electric cars, I decided to intervene them with the major oil corporations' logos. I did nothing else but just place the logos there, and we asked the owners to have these cards for free during 2 weeks. And I thought it was going to be a temporary intervention. And then, of course, the connection for me was, well, these companies fighting for territories and crashing with each other. I produced it at the time when the Bush administration was planning the Alaskan oil pipe. So it was more or less the context. But the intervention became kind of permanent. It lasted 8 years. They didn't remove the logos. It stayed there until the fun fair disappeared because of all the gentrification that happened in that area. But yeah, it's an example. And I usually respond to the context where I'm exhibiting, like here in Nevada. This slide is showing the installation I produced for the Sydney Biennial, and there my research was connected to kangaroo skin and, well, very much the use of natural resources for political intentions. In the case of Australia, they continue hunting kangaroos, not because it's a necessary material, but because it's used as a kind of political resource to get the Aboriginal votes, and also isolating the communities from any other economic activity. And some of the companies that end up using those kind of materials, despite some of the major brands are mainly designing with high-tech synthetic materials, well, they end up using kangaroo skin just to use that material and continue with that kind of political strategy. And that's the third wall of that mural. Some of the football players that end up advertising those kind of brands. This is the underwater demonstration I organized in Akumal, the area of, well, it's more or less the area of Cancun. But for me, it was very important to not only learn about climate change, but go and see what kind of destruction it was creating in the coral reef areas in Mexico. This is the Mesoamerican coral reef. It's the second largest after the Australian one. So I had to learn diving. It took me 4 days, and then in 2 days I had to do all the shooting to produce the project. It was great, really intense, but at the end the banners displayed comment on everything is common, but also the statistics of how much coral reef is left in the world, and how many species depend of that coral reef. We have less than 1% of coral, and 25% of species depend of that little bit of coral left. Another way I've produced projects is also through mural paintings. Here I'm using early graphics produced during the colonization of America, together with branding, and when I present that mural painting, I always distribute a fruit salad that everybody thinks is very exotic, but all those are bought in local markets. I've done actions. This is the border between Mexico and US. It was a project connected to the area of Marfa. And I had never been in the Rio Bravo, the Rio Grande. So I decided to go there, and my initial idea was to produce something as bridge. It could be telecommunications or probably an accident that could help me cross between one border and the other. But I found this area. I mean, the river is meant to be the natural border between both countries, but not only the river, but the deepest part of the river. And sometimes it's under a canyon, sometimes it's split in two, and sometimes it disappears, it's dry. So it was interesting that at some moment it became a very abstract situation for me to think about the usual media that presents division, surveillance, border patrol. So it was liberating. No? All that was gone. I only had the desert. What I did was I painted the rocks that I could use to cross from one side to the other, and that's what I did. I crossed from the US to Mexico and back. I only had a little Ziploc bag with my passport inside, and the water was up to here. Okay, so for me, it was one of the most important projects I've done. Later, it became an installation where you could see the relics of the action and the photographic documentation. Other pieces, I've solved them also with tar. Using tar as a material, I produce a series of paintings, installations. That's also a reference to the marine exploration, but also the American interests in the region. Other symbols that connect more to classic ecology, but also symbols that connect to nationalism. This is a Mexican flag, partially covered with tar. And well, the project here became probably the starting point of long research, because I started being interested in fire. And the first time I visited Reno, one step outside the airport, I could smell smoke. And that was really interesting and probably guided the research afterwards. I learned that Smokey the Bear has been the wildfire prevention campaign in the US, probably the longest. And it started at the time of war. So that was very interesting for me. And from that kind of information and this interest on fire, not only as natural phenomena, but also how fire connects to culture and destruction. And well, this early knowledge that was shared that at the end triggered civilization. This was very interesting for me, go back in history and see from where these kind of campaigns were coming from. So the design for the exhibition here, it's this graphic gesture and a question. So I decided to use Smokey the Bear as the main character and comment also on this Hokan Washu text, Dahu, that, it comes from that family language, but the very well-known name, Tahoe, would be its mispronunciation. So for me, it was interesting to start questioning from where the campaign of the Smokey the Bear came, and also connected to the indigenous use or prevention of fire, how they dealt with fires. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minerva. Rubén Ortiz-Torres is a Mexican artist based in Los Angeles since 1990. He attended Cal Arts for graduate school and has been a professor of visual arts at UC San Diego since 2001. Trained as a painter, Ortiz-Torres is also a photographer and documentary filmmaker whose work deals with issues of race, class, protest, and community organization. Rubén has been very busy lately with 2 projects that are part of the Pacific Standard Time exhibitions throughout Southern California this fall. One of them is a solo show, and the other is a major exhibition that he curated, featuring more than 150 works by 48 artists, investigating the myriad ways Latin American artists have responded to, reinterpreted, reappropriated, subverted, and misappropriated Disney iconography. Welcome, Rubén.
Okay. So how do I do the slide thing? How do I move the slide?
Either the arrows here, or you can use the remote arrows there.
Oh, let me see if it works. All right. Okay. Hi. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the museum, because I didn't know that this conference was going to be so important. I really thought, I mean, honestly, I thought we were just going to talk about the show a little bit and do maybe like a tour about it or something. But I'm very happy to be here, actually. I'm very impressed. I hope I won't disappoint. I also, yeah, well, and so what I'm going to do today, actually, as JoAnne said, I have worked, I mean, my work, I've done a lot of things, and very different ones, so it would be very hard for me, actually, to present what I do, because it'll be all over the place. But what I'm going to do is just talk about the piece that actually I'm presenting here, because I think it's on top of the piece, there's this story, and the story, I think, it's very interesting. This story happened some time ago. It happened in 1999, so I don't know how it's going to read today, but I think, I mean, we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to read this text, and then I'll show you guys some images. Okay, so it says, Micah was from Moreshet, a village at the edge of the lowland, through which all the armies of Assyria and Egypt were passing. He was well acquainted with the suffering and destruction of war, and also with exploitation of the peasants. One day, God called him and gave him strength, justice, and courage, and he violently denounced the injustices that were practiced everywhere. Book of Micah, the Holy Bible. And I'm just going to pass here so you guys can see the text too as well. Because as you guys can see, my students always complain about my accent, so hopefully if you guys cannot understand my accent, can see the text. Okay, so, so here we go. One morning early last year, the cacophony produced by a gardener's leaf blower woke up disgruntled former Catwoman Julie Newmar. Shortly thereafter, she joined other sleepyhead West Side homeowners such as Peter Graves of Mission Impossible fame and Tony Danza in supporting a citywide ban on this polluting machine. Quickly, our leaders passed a law that would punish concrete musicians of the lawn with a $1,000 fine or 6 months in prison. Should they dare to continue using their instruments? How could such a useful device lead to such draconian punishment? Ironically, it was the same city of Los Angeles that recommended the use of these contrivance to save water when clearing leaves in times of drought. Indeed, the city bought 300 leaf blowers for use by their city workers. But the law did not apply to them, just to private gardeners. For those acquainted with such things, leaf blowers are those ubiquitous backpacked canyons that move fallen leaves and dust from one place to another. These industrial age power-driven fans transform former feudal peasants into space-age garden warriors. Like other gardening tools, such as weed whackers and lawnmowers, leaf blowers use a two-cycle gasoline-powered engine that is not very efficient. Burning oil, they pollute as much as all motorcycles and are just as noisy.
Nevertheless, power tools, precious commodities that supposedly enable the handyman to be fast and self-sufficient, remain symbols of status and manhood. Like the motorcycle or jet ski, leaf blowers also signified a certain freedom. Our local catwoman called the leaf blower a 3-foot extension of a gardener's masculinity. Clearly, these far too well-endowed immigrant gardeners trespassing the West Side Gardens of Eden had to be castrated. In California, the art of gardening has evolved from a Zen-inspired practice embodied in the stereotype of the khaki-clad, pith-helmeted Japanese to a new era of industrial mow, blow, and go. Baseball cap-wearing Mexicans have mechanized gardening, making what was once reserved only for the rich affordable for the average homeowner. Without the leaf blower, gardeners, most of whom work for themselves, have to do twice the work for the same pay because their customers are reluctant to pay more. Given the new law, a decent salary and even one's job are threatened by an endless pool of unskilled, cheap labor who would broom for almost no pay. Paradoxically, liberal local politicians like Jackie Goldberg and Tom Hayden have sided against the workers in defense of the environment, although the level of pollution from all gardeners' tools put together is minute in relation to car and industry pollution, and is even offset by the oxygen produced by the gardens they tend. On the other hand, many Republican lawmakers have sided with the gardeners, arguing that the consumer should dictate policy and that the law should treat small entrepreneurs as it does large companies, who are given a grace period to adapt to new standards. In order to get public attention for their desperate cause, gardeners formed the unique Association of Latin American Gardeners of Los Angeles and started protesting in non-conventional ways, marching barefoot or leaving a pile of brooms in front of City Hall. All right. They ultimately opted for the last resort in political protest. Okay. The hunger strike, with which they attracted media coverage and brief worldwide attention. That night, a Salvadoran immigrant named Godi Sanchez was watching the news in his modest apartment in Sherman Way in the San Fernando Valley. A Pentecostal man by faith and a car mechanic by profession, Godi relates how in his dreams he was told by God to fix the problem and save his brothers from slow starvation. The next morning, Godi used a car battery to turn a gasoline-powered motor into an electrical one. He arrived at City Hall with a funky and ingenious relic. The media, the gardeners, and even our entrepreneurial mayor were perplexed. The gardeners thought the machine very heavy and somewhat weak, but nothing that couldn't be improved. Godi went back to his housing unit to sleep. Almighty God, he believed, could do more than pass the city smog check with a weak prototype. Once again, the Lord revealed in his creative mind the solution to the problem. The next morning, Godi would enter his garage car shop research laboratory to adapt the silencer of an automatic weapon into the exhaust pipe of a filtered gasoline-powered leaf blower and produce a quieter, lighter, and more powerful machine. Godi claims that the condensation that forms in its exhaust pipe is holy water. Upon bringing his revamped power tool to City Hall once again, Godi finally convinced our lawmakers that this social conflict had to do only with faulty industrial design and a lack of faith. The city compromised, and the gardeners lifted the strike. The tale of Godi Sanchez is remarkable. A penitent refugee who was an Air Force mechanic trained by Americans and Israelis, he was saved by the Lord and ended up escaping the horrors of the war in El Salvador by crossing the border and being born again. Today in the United States, he seeks redemption by sharing his inventive gifts with his fellow workers, some of whom fought on the opposite side of the war in their native country. Unfortunately, God hasn't yet revealed to Godi how to make a profit or market his miraculously concoctions. He has tried to patent his inventions with handmade drawings that include biblical quotes. He is improving his original designs. Some use gas and have electric starters. Others incorporate gadgets like a water sprinkler that diminishes the amount of dust generated. One even incorporates a jet propeller. he has come to realize that capital and infrastructure are needed, and his limited English proficiency hinders him in his efforts. In the meantime, the Department of Water and Power is spending a great amount of money on research and on a sleek-looking, cutting-edge machine that is much less powerful and efficient than Gori's humble inventions. Gori's work exemplifies an artistic process of customization, in which a resourceful individual adapts an industrial product to his or her own practical, social, and political needs. By recycling different parts from cars, appliances, and even weapons, Gori creates funky-looking mechanical collages that alter the original form of the leaf blower while improving its function. His work juxtaposes the tradition of California assemblage with the functional dictums of the Bauhaus and the customization inherent to Mexican-American car culture. He's not just recodifying or recontextualizing for the purpose of commentary or to alter the linguistic system. However, but in order to have a pragmatic effect on reality, by customizing an already existing product, he speaks through the culture at large, locating his art within a social framework that rather than isolating it as the product of a singular voice. I don't know to what extent Gori Sanchez's designs will affect or influence the future of the leaf blower, but certainly they have restored his faith in God, and more importantly, the faith of immigrant gardeners in the political process. For me, Gori has proven the feasibility of an interactive, nonlinear creative process, a kind of futurism where technology is not a goal in itself, but through customization, a way to access a more democratic future for everyone. So that's that's the thing. Thank you. And I'll just show a few things. Well, these are the machines. That's the one that Gori customized, actually. The one that is here on display on the left was the one that actually was presented in City Hall and that ended up the hunger strike. I mean, just a couple of anecdotes is that luckily, I mean, somehow when the LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum, wanted to do a studio visit, I told them, I usually don't like those studio visits because I have to clean the studio, it's full of beer and stuff. But that time I thought it would be appropriate because I had this thing to show them, and I really wanted this thing to be in Los Angeles and to be in a place where the gardeners could see it. So eventually the piece ended up in LACMA. And the piece on the right is one that I customized. Obviously that one pollutes and contaminates, I mean, those makes noise and everything, but it has 24 gold carat and a plated engine. And in fact, it's all gold plated. Even the parts that you don't see of the machine are actually gold plated. And it has velvet upholstery and a candy paint job and so on and so forth. And just to conclude, these are the drawings of, I mean, I did this lawnmower. And part of the idea is that I have a sister who's a composer, and actually I collaborated with her several times. We did an opera together. But in this case, I wanted Gabriela to write a piece for gardening instruments, because I thought that if they were noisy, perhaps they could they could serve as musical instruments. So she wrote the piece sampling all the gardening instruments, and we made this machine that danced to it. So we did this kind of mechanic ballet, I suppose, of sorts. So thank you very much. And
thank you so much, Rubén. And I just wanted to point out that I've never asked for a loan of a work of art before where they said, okay, on one condition, we will need to drain the battery before you can borrow it. Like, okay, contemporary art, you never know. So Ana Teresa Fernández was born in Tampico, Mexico, and moved to the US when she was 10. She attended graduate school at the San Francisco Art Institute. A political activist, performance artist, and painter, Fernández's work touches upon issues of labor, the female body, and subjugation. Through her work, Fernández illuminates the psychological and physical barriers that define gender, race, and class in Western society and the global South. She was formerly a competitive swimmer and has been quoted as saying that the 3 things she can't live without are art, her family, and surfing. Please welcome Ana Teresa Fernández.
Thank you so much, JoAnne, and the museum for having us. Similar to Rubén, I'm gonna show a couple, I do a lot of things, but I'll show what led up to this piece that's showing here in the museum. So when I came across this story, I remember my friend who had posted it on Facebook, she had also posted her individual picture as a black square, luto, which for us in Mexico means mourning. I hadn't known these 43 students, but similarly to thousands and thousands of Mexicans who continue to practice this, of placing their own identity into blackness, I wanted to pay homage to them, and I decided to become that black square. I painted out a room entirely in black, shining light onto the 43 disappeared students. I wore that blackness, painting myself into the unseen, into mourning. I extracted stills from the performance and created these paintings, which represent the dismembered political landscape, the ruptured body of Mexico, torn apart, creating image and narrative from that which has been erased. Oh, shoot, sorry. I have a heightened sense of awareness for the not seen, a gravity towards the socially erased. My work was birthed and inspired by my own experience growing up in a country and culture where women are constantly muted and their labor slip through men's consciousness. I was raised in Tampico, Tamaulipas, a small town in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. My father's a cardiologist, and my mother, along with the rest of the women in my family, were stay-at-home mothers, housewives. Linda, a friend of mine from Cape Town, once told me, South Africa is not a name, it's a direction. Housewife is not an occupation, it's a location. My mother had urgently wanted to study archaeology, but wasn't allowed to do so, as well as many other women in my family. There's a 15-year difference of education between my father and my mother, an intellectual and labor disparity that exists in the rest of my family. But it wasn't until my family moved us to San Diego, California, rupturing this wall, when I was 11 years old, I was able to see and feel the difference, understanding the opportunities women had in the US, much more so than in Mexico. But I remember when I was 16 years old, and I had been traveling back and forth, experiencing and growing up between these two countries. I was spending a summer, I was 16 in Mexico, hanging out at a bar, as most 15, 16-year-olds do. But I heard this girl crying in the bathroom, and she said, men want a whore in the bed and a lady at the table. And at 16, it felt like a bulldozer in my stomach. I wasn't quite aware of what that meant, but slowly growing up, it became more and more visible as I was constantly told to be quiet at tables, at dinner parties. However, when we would socialize and we would be out in public, women were so loud with their bodies, and that was the volume that was socially acceptable. It was a physical volume. So the first series of performances, I practiced tango for many years, and this dance has a precise and balanced power symmetry between the leader and the follower. The follower has to apply the same power as to the leader in order to gracefully move and create these centrifugal motions throughout the dance floor. These were the first series of performances, and I used this power structure and began dueling the spaces that so many of the women in my family inhabited, using it as a physical, psychological partner. These were photographed, and then they were turned into life-scale paintings. The Annunciation, I felt that so much of my mother had been killed, a part of herself had been killed in order to raise us. This one was done at the time of SB 1070 in Arizona, where it became acceptable to racially profile individuals. So much of your identity became your downfall. Undocumented individuals, once marginalized, that had not been seen or noticed, began to be seen and hunted down. And doing a performance where I was hidden behind a bedsheet, my dreams and the shadow became my partner. Carl Jung talks so much about the shadow being the parts of us that aren't spoken, that are unacted upon. And so the shadow has become a constant partner of mine in a lot of my work. So around 2005, when we were all grown up, I have three other siblings. My mother went back to school studying archaeology and began picking up a camera. This became the subject of her work in archaeological and sociological study. This is the border. At the same time, I was studying at the Art Institute, as JoAnne mentioned, and making ends meet working at any cafe or restaurant. So it was so interesting that as my mother introduced me to this place, which is the border, a place that I had crossed so many times but actually hadn't known that well, at the same time that I was working at this cafes and meeting men from the Yucatan Peninsula, from Nicaragua, from El Salvador, hearing their stories of how they actually had risked their lives to come to the other side, and they were doing the same type of job that women were doing in Mexico, which was this maintenance, this is cleaning other people's shit. And my mother collecting the stories of the people that hadn't been able to cross. It's when I began to go to the actual border and do these performances. They're very Sisyphean, addressing the political endless cycle of just what was happening in the political, trying to clean up the political filth. Working with my mother here, and here are the shadows of the use of this shadow becomes a partner, almost like the unspoken stories that have not been told of the people that have actually died at the border or attempted to cross. This is the actual border, train tracks that are perforated into the sand that divide the Pacific Ocean. I think about metaphors and so much about visual clues, and we think about train tracks as a metaphor for journey, continuation, exploration, and here at the border, they stand as an impediment. Do not dream further, do not walk further, and they look like prison bars. However, this place was different. In 1971, Nixon gifted this area to state parks. Pat Nixon went there to commemorate it as Friendship Park, a place where the US and Mexico meet amicably. There was only a freestanding monument and a chain link fence, and she actually ordered one of the Border Patrol agents to cut it down because she wanted to greet people more properly. She said, "I hate to see a fence anywhere. I hope it doesn't stand here that much longer." However, in 1994, landing strips from the Persian Gulf War were used, and it be erected as a wall that first divided these two countries. In 2005, it got translated into these train tracks that look like prison bars. However, Friendship Park was a place where on Sundays, families would come and converge, see each other, touch each other, embrace. They would share meals for hours. They would come from all over Latin America, all over the States, from Canada and beyond, and they would come here to touch each other, spend time, connect, form a familiarity with people that you knew were your family and that you hadn't been able to be close to. However, that changed in 2011 under the Obama administration, where he closed Friendship Park's doors and placed several thick meshes of metal wall across so people were no longer able to touch. This thing called pinky kiss, where you can actually just fit your pinky through these meshes, and that is what people are able to do now. I want to ask you, what would it feel like if you weren't able to hug your mother, to hold your child, to kiss your lover. I was completely outraged, heartbroken. Bell Hooks said, "The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off emotional parts of themselves." This wall is mutilating an ecosystem of humanity, of connection, of love, of basic rights. One morning, it just hit me. I'm not sure how or when, but after 6 years of working on this wall, I finally got the courage and this idea of using my most powerful weapon, which is paint. And I called my mother up right away, and I said, "Mom, I have this really crazy idea, erasing the wall." And she's like, "What?" And I told her, she's like, "You gordita, you have to come down here and do it." So I flew down there. And then the next morning, we went to the Home Depot, and I looked over hundreds of Pantone chips. There's this place, there's always a collection of brooms, so there's always a gray haziness. And so trying to find the tone that would sing in the same tone as the sky was the most challenging part. We went there at 7 a.m. and I began to paint. And 15 minutes into it, as I was climbed up on a ladder, 10 foot high, there was glaring sirens in a pickup truck that was screaming to me on the loudspeaker, "Get down from the ladder!" And so I was trembling down. I came down, and I started getting yelled at by this border patrol. "No debería de estar haciendo esto, señorita. You shouldn't be doing this, ma'am." And so I noticed that in that slight moment where they addressed me as ma'am, I had leverage to be able to communicate with them. And after almost an hour of debating back and forth, they began to actually listen to me and what the concept and the idea behind it. And I could see them smirking, and I was like, "Just let me finish what I started." And so they were like, "Okay, like, okay, go do it." And ironically, it's one of my favorite slides. So ironically, and I will say this was at the time where Martha Stewart was in prison. So I think she would be really proud. And I'm like, "Martha, maybe you can paint your way out of prison." Anyway, after 6 hours of continuing to do this, I had this piece, Erasing the Border. Which I have to say, one of my favorite all-time moments of this was I was climbed up on the upper left-hand side. I was almost finished. I was tired. I was freezing. My legs were trembling. And all sorts of people had come up to me and asked me questions and had these conversations as I was doing it. But I was almost finished, and I hear this boy, "Oh yeah, I get it." And I was like, and it was this crazy, sweaty, man, covered in just sweat. And I was just like, okay, before I finish, I have to just come down and listen to him, what he's got to say. And so I climbed down from the ladder, and he was like, "No mames, le entiendo." And he's like, "I totally get it." And I'm like, what? He's like, I run every day from really far away, and I come and I touch the wall, and then I run back home. And this I've done every single day for the last 10 years. And this is the first time where I was just running, and I looked up, and I thought that the wall was being torn down. I got so excited that I began to imagine what the space would look like without a wall. And so for me, that was such a pivotal moment in which I realized that how important the imagination can be. In 2015, I was invited to do a statewide artist residency through ASU throughout the state of Arizona. They asked me to do a final public piece, and at the time, the talk of building a wall was rampant by Trump, and it was just this crazy idea, and everyone was talking about it. And so I said, why not do Erasing the Border here in the desert in Nogales, but as a collective engagement? And so as I was touring the state of Arizona, we collected a bunch of artists, activists, teachers, students, everyone. And one of the things as public engagement happens, the surprises along the way, Luis Guerra happened to be there that morning collecting cans. And he had lived for the last 15 years on the other side. He had a wife and 2 kids, and he had recently been deported. And he said, as he came, he approached this and he asked us what we were doing, and I said, well, we're erasing the border. And he said, I just have to do this because this is my ultimate wish. And afterwards, he said to me, this action is giving me strength. And for a minute, I no longer feel I am in jail. He, alongside with a Border Patrol agent who had asked me what we were doing, and once I told him, he picked up a roller and began painting side by Luis. It's one of the things that one can never imagine would happen. Murakami once said, it's all a question of imagination. Our responsibility begins with the power to imagine. Yeats said, in dreams begins responsibility. Flip this around, and you could say that where there's no power to imagine, no responsibility can arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana Teresa. That was beautiful. I think we'll just open up to questions right away since we're short on time. And if you don't ask questions fast enough, then I'm going to ask questions. And I have plenty. So if we could bring the lights up. There they go. Thank you. I literally can't see anyone, so, but I bet there are some questions. So why don't we leave it to Chris Martin to give the mic to the first question.
Sorry.
Yes.
This is just a very quick question for Minerva. I'm interested in the bacteria and the plastics. Are they breaking the plastics down physically into smaller pieces, or are they breaking them down chemically into their elements?
Chemically. And in fact, we found not only one bacteria, but something that is called a consortium of bacteria. And the chemist that was part of the research, she thought that we could also get rid of the bacteria and stay with the genetic information of the bacteria that in fact destroys or is interested in the plastic. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Right here.
Thanks to all of you. That was really great. I have two unrelated questions for two different people, but I thought I'd just get them both out at the same time. Ana Teresa, I'm just really interested to hear you talk about why you paint rather than use the photographs. I'm just curious about that decision. And then the other question I'll just ask Rubén. Okay, I don't know how much of that was fiction and how much of that was history. The whole story about the leaf blowers and everything, and I mean, I'm sure people who know, but I thought it'd be nice to hear what actually, the real story.
Bueno. So for me, painting, there's more than 500 years of male depicting women through painting and depicting them fictionally, such as the very famous Angre painting of the Odalisque, the woman. She actually has 3 or 4 more vertebrae added, so she becomes stylized, and so women are constantly stylized. And as Virginia Woolf always addressed women in a lot of art, is so much about biography and being supporting roles. And for me, it was about really changing the history of painting of a woman depicting a woman autobiographically in a nonfiction matter, and pushing painting as a nonfiction medium, which I felt like hadn't been really done before as a documentation. So all my paintings are titled Documentation of Performance.
Can I answer? Okay, and in terms of well, everything I wrote there is true. The only thing I don't know if it's true is quotes of the Bible. Uh, but and and also, and of course, I don't know if God talked to Gotti, but that's what he's convinced that he did. Like, I mean, according to him, as far as I know, his testimony is that he spoke with God. I didn't see any evidence, but I saw the machine, so I think he did.
Yeah. We have a question actually from the Sky Room.
One of our viewers in the Sky Room. It's for Ana Teresa Fernández. This woman asks, the heels and dress are distressing. How did you choose this outfit, especially considering the work, the labor, and the ladder whenever you were erasing the border?
That's the superhero, quote unquote, costume comes from the tango. I like I said, I've been performing for many years, and part of the kind of the stoicness of it is trying to balance with your surface area gets highly diminished when you wear stilettos, and part of it is to kind of say, I can do this and I can do it while wearing these shoes and this dress.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask a question of Frohawk because he's not getting enough love. So, you're the one that went out last night. Okay. You have described yourself as a storyteller first and a painter second. What is the meta story you're trying to tell? And also, what about Lemuria?
Lemuria. Well, actually, the meta story, I mean, the big picture, it's just, you know, the world is the world, you know, like, I mean, I don't know, we're here for what, 100 years if we're lucky, 70 years. And, you know, I don't know, like, I don't want to focus on the minutia, you know, I want to focus on the big picture. The big picture is that everyone is in, you know, everyone deserves, you know, to live, to be happy, to love, to eat, to sleep, to rest. But, you know, like, we have these systems, and these systems, they've been around since the beginning of time. So, you know, I just pretty much just live in my head. Like, I just see this ideal world, but I have to address use the ugliness to address my utopia, which I'll probably never ever see physically, but at least I have it in my head. So Lemuria, yeah, it was basically an ancient continent that was allegedly existed in the Pacific Ocean. And actually, it was the Pacific Ocean and attached to the Indian Ocean. But, you know, it was one of those old maps where there was a whole lot of stuff there with sea monsters and, you know, things like that. But so Lemuria is just represents, like, you know, this great, you know, within the context of the Greater West, is this vast unknown space in the middle of the, you know, the Pacific Ocean. Even the Pacific, the name Pacific meaning, you know, calm, but it's anything but, you know, it's a whole lot of activity going on in the Pacific Ocean, especially that big giant island of plastic that's gonna hit any time, and your bacteria will help get rid of that. So we just, you know, take a tincture of that and drop a couple of gallons, and we should be done.
Yeah.
But that might actually kill all the fish too, so I don't know. So yeah, basically, you know, my whole narrative, like, again, like, I don't really, you know, when I'm not working on the work, I'm just dreaming about a better future.
Amen to that. All right, we're going to break for lunch now. Thank you.